Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Let's Talk Tenkara podcast. I'm Brenden Harden, and I am joined this week by Steve Mahle with Steve Mahle Fishing. Steve, how are you today?
Doing all right, man. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thanks for joining us. I know we talked a little bit in the past through Instagram, so it's nice to actually put a face to the messages that have been going back and forth.
For sure.
Steve, you are based in New York, is that correct?
Yes, Central New York, pretty much smack dab in the middle of the state.
Okay, perfect. So, New York isn't exactly what people think of when they think of Tenkara.
Yeah, hard to argue with that, for sure.
I mean, when we started talking, you were sending me videos of catching bass and all these things that, like, you hear about people doing, but it's not common. When people hear Tenkara, they think trout. What drew you to Tenkara as a bass angler?
Pretty much, I backed into fly fishing in general for species other than trout through learning how to fly fish for trout. I had a buddy that taught me how to Western style fly fish, and he would take me down to the Catskills, which is actually a fairly popular trout area in New York. It's only about an hour and a half away from me. Some of the pretty famous like rivers and streams are down there. And he taught me how to fly fish, basically for trout. And I absolutely fell in love with it, that I wanted to fish for everything on the fly rod. And, that eventually led to Tenkara, which then led to, well, I don't want to pick up the bait caster. I don't want to pick up the Western rod. I don't want to pick up the spinning rod. So I'm going to just attempt to do this with a Tenkara rod and see what happens. I don't think many people would call it Tenkara fishing, probably more fixed line fly fishing for sure. But yeah, I mean, the opportunities for species other than trout are very available for me. So it was just important for me to just try for whatever I could fish for, honestly.
Yeah, I remember one of the first conversations we had, outside of you reached out because you listened to the podcast, and then we started talking a little bit. One of the first conversations we had was you headed out to the Catskills,
Yep.
and you were headed out there, and you're like, man, I just need some motivation to not take the Western fly rod. And so we talked a little bit about like how I would approach the bigger water that you were looking at. How did that trip end up going for you? I know we talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, it ended up going really, really great. I rolled up there with my T-Hunter, and I brought the Western rod, but I left it in the car. And just in case, I didn't want to drive all the way down there and, not be able to do what I wanted to do. But I was pretty committed to using the Tenkara rod. And I ended up catching fish before the buddy of mine who was there with his Western fly rod, because I was, walking upstream, just kind of casting into little pockets, picking apart little pieces of water, and I was nymphing. He was kind of waiting for the dry fly hatch to hit, and so he wasn't really set up to do any, nymphing with bead heads or anything like that. And I had the beastly T-Hunter on me, so I was throwing whatever I wanted and just walking around and picking apart little pockets and catching fish that way. We ended up landing on a really intense sulfur hatch, which, like, the Catskills is known for its dry fly hatches and stuff like that. And we landed on a sulfur hatch, and it ended up being like cast after cast after cast. We were catching them, and he was using his Western rod. I was using my T-Hunter. We were both catching, fish left and right, and it kind of solidified the idea that I did not need to bring any Western rods with me. And any time I've gone back since, I have not. So I really appreciate you talking to me about that, because I was really on the fence.
No, I definitely understand that. I remember going back, it's been about 5 years, a little over 5 years, roughly, give or take a little bit, since I got into Tenkara. And I remember doing the same thing, like looking at the Provo River, the Ogden River, bigger rivers around me. It's like, man, I know I can catch fish on these little streams, but these bigger rivers, they intimidate people when it comes to Tenkara, because they have that mindset of, you get out there with a fly rod, you can cast all the way across that river, you can fish those pockets that are further away. And you don't need to reach out that far. You just, like you said, pick apart the water in ways that you would pick apart a small stream. Look for those little pockets, and it's crazy what you can get into.
You just have to be willing to move your feet.
100%. And that's one of the big things that I tell people when I talk to them is it's like, look, when I Western fly fish, I would fish a pocket of water that's 50 feet away. I'd cast from 50 feet away, and I'd catch fish. But doing Tenkara, I'm going to fish all of the water between me and that 50-foot away hole, and I'm going to catch fish the entire way there.
Yeah, the thing I noticed too is I'm a lot more intentional with like the angles I'm going to play and where I'm going to walk and how I'm going to get to that spot 50 feet away, and looking at all that stuff beforehand that I wouldn't normally even care to look at. And so it's just changed the mentality, I guess, on the water in general, where, you know, this small thing I would normally pass up, I'm not going to pass it up anymore because there's probably a fish there. And if I got to walk through it because I'm a little bit limited by needing to wade, I might as well cast at it, and it usually results in fish.
Absolutely. It's really crazy when you look at it that way. I'm the type of person that 2 to 4 casts in a spot is good for me, and I'm moving. If I don't catch a fish in those couple casts, then it's time to hit the next spot. I like to be moving up the stream, up the river. And when you take that approach to it, like especially when you've got a fly that you know is working that day because you've been catching fish on it, when you take the approach of I'm not going to waste 15, 20 minutes in this pocket of water unless the fishing's good, obviously. But when you take that approach, you're just moving a lot more, you're catching a lot of fish, and it's a crazy scenario to put yourself in when you're just constantly moving from pocket to pocket catching fish.
Yeah, I kind of get antsy if I'm stuck in the same place for too long now because, I used to be a lot more lead-footed in the water. I'd kind of pick my spots and really try to stay there for a while. And now I kind of want to move. If I'm with people that I'm fishing with and they're not really as eager to move, we end up kind of separating a little bit because I just want to keep moving.
Yeah, and as a guide, it's crazy to see that as well. I had a group a couple weeks ago, had four gentlemen out on the water, and 3 of the 4 of them were pretty set on, I'm going to sit in this area, I'm going to fish here until you tell me to move, versus I take that back, 2 of the 4. One of them wandered off, and it took me about an hour to figure out where the heck he went. Just because he went looking for another hole. And the other one was just constantly moving his way upstream, just pushing to the next spot. And, I mean, he caught the biggest fish out of the group because he was just being the front runner, getting up into these pockets that people weren't looking at. And it was fun to watch the different styles of people fishing. But like you said, I'm the same way. I get antsy. I don't like to sit in one spot. So,
yeah, I don't know if it's impatience on my part or laziness on theirs, but I understand when it's necessary to slow down and when it's necessary to speed up. I'm learning that line.
Absolutely. It's like I was talking to one of my buddies, Nathan, a couple weeks ago, and like I said, I don't sit in one spot very often. The exception I give is there's a little river in Idaho that my dad and I fish pretty regularly. And one day last year, we stood in one spot for 2 hours, and between the 2 of us, we netted 100 fish.
Yeah.
Like, it was insane. I've never had fishing, even in that same spot. I've never had that type of action since then. But we literally, in 2 hours, brought 100 fish to the net, and it was the best experience. It was my dad's, second experience with Tenkara fishing. It was really cool to be able to have that experience. But it was
I mean, that's pretty much how that Catskills trip we're talking about went. Was I was walking around, picking things apart, nymphing. As soon as the dry fly stuff started going off, and it was one pool where they were rising like crazy, and it was just cast. We stopped moving at that point. At some point, you got to recognize when it's good. You got to stay.
Yeah, when the getting's good, you keep getting. Well, that's awesome. So, talk to me about bass fishing, because like I said, that's something that people don't really think about. You mentioned you started with it in Western fly fishing. You moved over to Tenkara. What are some of the things you're doing that you're finding success with when targeting bass?
I pretty much, first of all, I originally, before I got into fly fishing, was bass fishing from a kayak. And so I do a fair amount of Tenkara bass fishing from a kayak. But I also will, wade and fish that way. But so there's kind of two approaches, I guess. But the main thing I do is just throw a streamer on, and a bigger one than most people would probably think is appropriate. And I try to mimic what I would have done with the Western fly rod, with the kind of like 6-inch strips with my line hand. So I'll cast it out, I'll get the rod basically parallel to the water, and then I'll just twitch it back towards myself in little 6-inch increments to make the streamer, go, just like I'm stripping a streamer on anything else. I also fish a lot of like topwater foam poppers, stuff like that with the Tenkara rod. And I actually like that a lot. The tension you can keep in the line when you don't have that excess line in your line hand, stripping and trying to keep it. If you can keep your rod twitching at a good clip, you can keep that tension on the line and get a lot of hookups with topwater like bass. It's a lot of fun. Large and smallmouth both. But yeah.
That's something that I haven't ever tried on the Tenkara rod. I've thrown streamers, and I've thrown some big streamers. I mean, the T-Hunter can throw some big stuff. Now that I've got Phoenix Rising, there's no telling what I'll decide to throw on that. But when you look at like poppers and things like that, that's something that I've never ventured into on a Tenkara rod. I mean, I dabbled in it a little bit when I Western fly fished, but I mean, targeting trout, poppers aren't that big of a thing. So, I mean, I throw them for bluegill on occasion.
Yeah, I don't throw anything like that unless I'm specifically targeting bass. But I have a lot of water near me where I can get 3, 4, 5 pound bass on, the fixed line setups with the Tenkara rod. And so top water bites when the bass are big and they're aggressive and they're exploding on the top of the water, it's just kind of hard to pass that up.
That's awesome. I know you sent me a video probably in June. Of you catching those smallies at the base of the waterfall, standing on, I think you're on like a little rock point or something like that. And I was with Ruben from Wasatch Tenkara when you sent me that video. And I was like, dude, check this out. This guy's killing it. And started showing him some of your videos, and he was just grinning ear to ear watching these videos of you catching fish on his rods. It was awesome. Yeah,
that was I was with my buddy Bill. He's got a really cool Instagram page. He does a lot of center pin fishing. I don't know if you're familiar with center pinning.
I am not.
Yeah, so do you know what it is?
No.
Yeah, so it's basically a reel that has no drag whatsoever. It's completely free spooling.
Yeah, no, I am familiar with that.
Yeah, so he's gotten me into that a little bit, and I dabbled with that here and there, but he took me to that spot. He was running a center pin, and I was running the T-Hunter. And the T-Hunter pretty much I exclusively use for bass primarily. Occasionally I'll bust it out for trout, but it's a little heavy for the size trout that I catch generally.
Yeah.
So the T-Hunter's kind of been designated as the bass fishing rod, or whatever else.
Now you mentioned your T-Hunter rod. What rods do you have? I know we've talked about a few that you've got. What rods do you have in your lineup?
I don't have a ton. I try not to own 500 rods. I'm trying my best not to do that. It's very hard. But I've got the Shadowfire because the Shadowfire is just the greatest beginner rod of all time. I've got the T-Hunter, obviously, but I have it in an 8.2. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's an 8.2 flex, so it's a little stiffer. I've got the Baby Rodzilla, which I use for my small water excursions, and I absolutely love. I just got in the mail off eBay a Foxfire. And I have a Yari that's coming in the mail tomorrow. That's all the rods I have. I used to have a tiny 10.2. That was the first rod I ever got. Didn't exactly love it and sold it. And I donated my Hellbender to my brother-in-law, who I've slowly been converting into Tenkara fisherman. So
I thought there was a Hellbender missing from that lineup because we talked.
Yeah, the Hellbender's no longer mine, but it's still in my orbit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just picked up 2 new rods last week, So I am not on the same spectrum as far as trying not to own 500 rods. My wife is not entirely happy about it, but
Yeah, the goal for me, like what I've been trying to do, I don't know if I'm been successful or not, but I try to find like used rods on eBay, places like that, buy them, try them, and if I really like it, it stays, and if I don't love it, I sell it or move on. I don't like having stuff that just sits in the closet. So I'm really trying to try a bunch of different things, because that's the difficult thing with these rods is I can't go try them most of the time without buying them first. So I've been kind of scouring eBay every night and throwing bids on, and like I just got pretty good deals on the Foxfire and the Yari, and that's why those are coming to me.
yeah, no, the Foxfire, I'm not sure if you listened to my rod review video or not, but the Foxfire, I liked that rod to a point. It just, for me, it was a little bit too soft. I think for the little brookies and stuff you're targeting a lot, that rod is going to be pretty sweet. It's a little bit shorter than the Baby Rodzilla, so that might still be your go-to just for a little bit more reach. But it's a good rod. I mean, Brent from Dragon Tail, when I was talking to him a few months ago, he's like, you either love that rod or you hate that rod. There's not really a middle ground there. I'm one of the rare people that do kind of fall in the middle. It's like, it's not a bad rod. It just, for what I'm fishing, isn't the best option. The Yari intrigues me, so you'll have to let me know how that one fishes.
Yeah, the whole reason I got both of those is the glass aspect. I wanted to see if I liked that, and I liked the softness. I've heard the same thing about the Foxfire, how soft it is, and I'm just wondering if I'm a person who loves that soft action, and I'm just not aware of it yet because I haven't gotten to fish it. So I got to try it before I can make that decision for myself. I feel like at that point I'll have a pretty good spectrum of different feels across the board of different types of rods, you know.
Absolutely. And that's what I found. I ordered one of the two rods that I just picked up was just a cheap fiberglass Tenkara rod from, I think it was Aventic is the company. And I was pleasantly surprised with that rod. It's not a mix like you're going to find with the Foxfire. It's just straight fiberglass. And with the little brookies I was catching this last weekend, that rod was just an absolute hoot. It was so much fun. Versus when I was fishing the Foxfire, and for me, like I said, just doesn't fit well. The fish that I was catching, I think, were just a little bit too big for that rod. And so I think it's just I was possibly using it for the wrong application. And
right.
I was still pretty new to Tenkara at that point. So
yeah, I'm still at the point where I'm willing to try just about anything. You know, I gotta try it all and see what really works for me and what doesn't. I know for a fact that the Wasatch rods I like a lot, especially the T-Hunter for throwing like really big flies. I'm throwing streamers, you know, this big on that thing sometimes, and pretty air resistant stuff, and it gets the job done. Where I don't think I could do that with many of my other rods comfortably anyway.
That's the only rod that I've got I've got the Shadowfire as well. I've got a lot of Wasatch rods. I've got the Mizuchi right now from Dragon Tail, and I've got that Aventic rod. I've got some other cheap Amazon rods. The only rod that I'm going to trust if I'm throwing a big streamer is the T-Hunter or the Phoenix Rising.
Yeah. That rod seems intense.
It is an animal. The one thing I do love about Phoenix Rising is that spay rod handle, because most rods when you get that big, and I said it in my last episode, they just feel heavy, but because of that spay rod handle, you're able to just kind of rest that rod on your hip, and it's just a comfortable rod. Like, I fished it for over an hour. The only reason I quit fishing it at that point was because someone else wanted to turn with it, and it was the only one that we had at that point.
You got to share.
So share the love a little bit. But that's a great rod. I'm actually taking a trip back to Idaho next week and targeting sturgeon again. So we're gonna get her done one of these trips.
There you go. What kind of line you use with that?
So Idaho's very specific on what you're allowed and not allowed to use for sturgeon fishing. So I've got to set up my rod a very special way. So it actually falls a little bit more in the Keiru style fishing than it does in traditional Haniru Tenkara. And I mean, that's all right with me. One of the biggest differences is I do have to use bait. And so that's the one thing that I wish I didn't have to do. I wish I could take a fly and soak it in some like fish juice or something and call it good. But I do have to use bait because you've got to use certain hooks, you've got to use certain line. Like they're very specific because they are a protected endangered fish. So,
For sure.
But it's been an experience. I fought with one on my first attempt back in June. I fought with him for about 30 seconds before he shook the hook. The hook has to be a circle hook and it has to be barbless.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I assume you'd be the first person to do this.
To the best of my knowledge, if any of you listeners know of someone that's done this feat, let me know. I'd love to talk to them.
I can't imagine.
To the best of my knowledge, I will be the first person to. I talked to several guides that specifically guide sturgeon trips in Idaho. At one of the last expos I did, and every single one of them was just like, "Oh no, you can't do that. No, it won't." At which point I just go, "Okay, I'm going to go do it now."
Right.
You tell me I can't do something, I'm going to go figure out how to do it. But we'll see what happens. It'll be good. We're going out, like I said, next weekend. I've got 3 days that I'll be up there, so we'll see what happens.
Good luck.
Thank you. Speaking of, we were just talking about bait and how I'd rather use flies. So speaking of flies, what are your go-to flies? Obviously with bass, we're throwing streamers and poppers. What are you looking at when you're doing a trout trip?
Up until recently, I was pretty much exclusively using Western flies. Stimulators, Alcaracatus, sulfurs, just various dries, and a lot of like beadhead nymphs, pheasant tail, prince nymph, hare's ear, all those. I have been really fishing a lot of Kabari lately. I kind of made a point that I wanted to really get into that and learn that a little better. A bunch of people in the Tenkara community have tied and sent me flies that they like. Nick from NorCal Tenkara, Amanda, Lady Tenkara Bum, Camp Maid, Sage Heart Tenkara, all those people, who I've talked to on Instagram have all sent me kind of the flies that they like, and I've been exclusively using those lately. So it's pretty much I'll use anything. I'm not picky. I don't have a preference. I'm just trying a lot of things. I will say a lot of the Sakasa Kabari stuff has been really on point for me lately. I've been getting really comfortable with it and liking it a lot more. And the beadheads have filled my box less and less as of late.
That's awesome. I still throw a good mix of them just because as a guide, I've got to fish what's working, and sometimes the Kabari just doesn't get it done on the bottom water that I'm fishing on. But, there is that simplicity of the Sakasa or these other styles of Kabari. I've got a stiff hackle Kabari that kind of sits more on top and fishes phenomenal. If it does get sucked under and ends up fishing wet, it still fishes phenomenal. There's so many different applications and there's different styles of Kabari out there. A lot of people, when they hear Kabari, again, they think the traditional Sakasa. You have the soft tackle, stick in reverse up from where your barb's at. And, there's just so many possibilities when you get into Kabari.
Some of the stuff that those guys that I talked about sent me is pretty out there, like pretty intense with colors. Some of them have beadheads too, I'm just trying everything. I will say that I notice on the smaller streams, I like the Kabari a lot more. The bigger water, I tend to go back to my beadheads. I think it's a depth thing mostly. I like the feel of the beadhead getting deeper in the bigger water, and when I'm in real small water, I like seeing the fly kind of just under the surface. So it's more of like a comfortability thing. I probably could fish both equally successfully in both situations, but it's more of like a confidence thing at this point, I think.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed when fishing Kabari on small streams as well, or just fishing small streams in general, really, is the trout are a lot more opportunistic. They're going to eat because if they don't eat, they don't eat.
Right. Yeah, there's not... Like when I go down to the Catskills, there's a significant more match the hatch mentality than when I go to some no-name tiny stream catching 5-inch brook trout. That way I'll kind of throw whatever in those situations and just do what I think is cool that day or what feels the best casting wise. I honestly just feel like it depends on where I'm fishing. Certain situations the trout seem a lot more picky. Certain situations, I literally feel like I could throw anything at them and it doesn't matter. So I like having a mix in my box. And you know, one way or the other, if I have a little bit of everything, then I feel confident. I don't like to have a crazy amount of one thing, but if I've got a little bit of everything, I tend to feel confident that I can get it done.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've done recently is I've been really consolidating the size of everything that I carry. I want to go as lightweight as possible. And so I've got 3 fly containers. They've each got 8 compartments on them. And I've got one of them that's only got dry flies, one of them that's got my like nymphs and wet flies, and then one that's only got Kabari in it. Those are my 3 fly containers. It's like, if it's not in here, I don't need it.
Yeah, I had 2 boxes. I had the dries and I had the bead heads and the Kabari. I've pared it down to 1 box with about a half and half split. I tend to keep things incredibly minimal. That's most of the reason why I got into Tenkara from Western fly fishing. I fell in love with fly fishing with the Western style, but it just felt like the intense amount of gear and different things for every little situation. You got your Euro rod and your dry fly rod and your streamer rod and your sink tip and your intermediate sink tip and your floating line and your this leader and your that leader, and you're carrying 77 things on you at all times. I liked the simplicity and versatility of just the only thing I got to do is change the fly at the end of my line. And so I didn't want to get into Tenkara and then carry like 7,000 things on me, because that's part of the reason why I got into it, you know?
No, and that was one of the biggest things for me to learn when I switched over to Tenkara was I didn't need all that extra gear. Like, I was the guy that is like, I've got my chest pack, I've got my vest, fly boxes all over the place. Like you said, 4 different sizes of tippet, all this stuff. And it's like, you don't need all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like when I got the shadow fire and stuff started clicking for me, I think I threw a beadhead nymph, tight lined it, caught a fish, threw dry flies, pretty relatively drag free, caught fish, put on a wet fly, swung it, caught a fish, put on a small streamer, stripped it, caught a fish, and the only thing I did was change the fly at the end of it. I didn't change lines, I didn't change rods, I didn't change leaders, all I did was just change the fly and a little bit of what I was doing with my technique. And I got to fish all those styles where, yeah, there's ways to do that with the Western rod, but it's a bit more complex than that. And I liked that I could do all that, in forecasts, I could give 4 drastically different presentations with things that I couldn't necessarily do with my Western rod,
Absolutely. And it's crazy. I was talking to a coworker, we're talking about these different rods and things like that you need for these different types of fishing with Western rods and gear. And I was talking to one of my coworkers earlier today, and he's into fly fishing, and he's like, I tried Euro nymphing with my rod. I've got a 9'6" rod. It's like, it just couldn't do it with that rod. It's just too short. I'm like, a lot of Euro nymphers are switching over to Tenkara rods because it's easier to tight line, and you don't need a bunch of extra gear to do it.
Yeah, I'd say the transition from like the Euro nymphing style, tight line nymphing, whatever you want to call it, Western style, to doing that with a Tenkara rod is a pretty easy transition, and you become a little more successful with the Tenkara rod. I mean, the amount of line I'd have out in my Euro rod would be less than, if not the exact same as my Tenkara setup anyway.
Yeah,
Very rarely did I strip out any line further than what I can get out of my Tenkara setup, you know?
exactly. And that was what got me is it's like you're looking at these guys, like you can watch the videos on YouTube of competition, your own emperors out, and they're using line that's maybe as long as their 11-foot rod that they're using, maybe that long. A lot of the time, like you said, they're not stripping out that much line, and the only reason they ever have more of the line than that out is because the fish bites and takes off with their line, and now they've got to fight it back in.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean the fly line for that stuff, for those rods, is so thin anyway. It's like the closest thing you can get to not fly line while still being fly line, you know? And I have a blast doing that. I'm not saying that it's a bad technique or that it's not good. It's just I personally found that the versatility and the simplicity of the Tenkara setup was just more my personality and my style. You know, because I wanted to be able to change on the drop of a dime and go from that tight line nymphing to a dry fly to a this to that, you know, without the hassle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do have like floating line set up for most of my rods and stuff because every now and then you get out into like a little pond or something and you want to throw a dry fly out there and, level line just ain't going to do it because it don't float. So I've got some little PVC lines and stuff, but so you can get into swapping your lines out, but it's so much easier than, all right, let me unline my rod, let me swap out my reel or swap out this spool, throw this new one on, reline my rod. It's just like, all right, hold on, let me pull this knot at the top, cinch this one on.
Yeah, any changes are hands down simpler, easier, quicker.
Yeah.
And there are some advantages for Western fly rods at times. There are certain situations where it might be the better technique. But for what I've been doing, I haven't needed to pick up my Western rod in quite some time,
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's just so versatile. And like you said, easy to do. That's a simplistic manner of it is what got me there.
Yeah, the thing I really worry about the most is just rod length.
Yeah.
After that, it's kind of like it is what it is. I'm not a whole lot changes for me after that.
Absolutely. I mean, every rod has a little bit different feel to it, as you've noticed. I mean,
Sure.
Obviously, the Tiny 10-2 is a very stiff rod. The 8.2T Hunter is a very stiff rod.
Mm-hmm.
As you get into like Baby Rodzilla, that's a 6.4 action. The Foxfire, that's a 6.4 action. The Yari, I believe, is a 6.4 as well.
I believe so.
And then there's just so many different options, and even one 6.4 is going to feel way different than another 6.4.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to go off of what you see is the listed action because, like you said, you can have 3 6.4s in your hand, and each one feels drastically different. And especially if you have like a zoom rod, like certain zoom rods feel great at one length, not great at another length, and so I barely ever fish it at certain lengths. And it's I feel like you have to fish the rod and see how it feels in your hand before you can really make that determination.
100%. I mean, I don't know about you. With me and the T Hunter I like most in that middle length.
Yeah, I do the smallest length or the middle length. Very rarely, if ever, do I go to the full.
Yeah, that full length is like, oh man, I wish I had just an extra foot of reach. Oh wait, I do. And I might for a couple casts.
I fish that rod from my kayak a lot, and so I don't have to worry as much about reach because I can kind of paddle into places stealthily. Right. And I actually use a shorter line when I'm on my kayak because I learned that, when you're standing up, you have the certain rod length, the angle of the fish when you're pulling it in. But when you're sitting down in a not static place and you're pulling the fish in, a shorter line helps a little bit, and you don't really need to worry as much about the reach. Learning how to net fish from my kayak with a Tenkara rod in the beginning was kind of hilarious, but it's I've got it down fairly okay now.
That's good. I mean, we've got that iconic, netting pose. You got your arm stretched back and your other arm down, but I don't imagine how you try to do that in a kayak. So
Yeah, it's the shorter line definitely helps, and usually it's get the fish to the boat and then switch to a hand line. Once I have the hand line, be incredibly patient, kind of bring the fish directly up next to me in the kayak, and then pin the net
yeah,
against the kayak and kind of scoop it up that way. That's been the most effective way. Um, keeping the fish from jumping out of the water while you're in a kayak is also difficult because when you're sitting down, the rod angles to get it down low parallel with the water is not as easy to get that side pressure and stuff. And the fish are always coming up at you because you're sitting on top of the water. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense actually. So one day I'll have to make it out there and we'll have to go fishing. You'll have to show me what you're talking about, though.
Yeah. I don't know if it's even the most effective way to go about things, but it's just a lot of fun and I like doing it.
Absolutely. So when you get out, I mean, I know you fish kind of a combination of bigger rivers and streams. What is your ideal fishing scenario?
Depends on what I've been doing lately, but I'd guess more recently I've been going to really small bodies of water and going after like brook trout and stuff. I took a trip to the Adirondacks, which is like a mountain range up north of me, which has a lot of brook trout. And I went to Acadia National Park and got into some brook trout there. And then just a bunch of small, tiny, no-name bodies of water near my house. And I'm really liking that kind of exploration aspect of everything, kind of hike into the small water, not really sure what's going to happen, and feeling like $1 million catching 4-inch brook trout. I've been really enjoying that lately.
I was showing pictures again to a different coworker of the brook trout from this last week. He's like, man, those are small fish. Like when I was younger, like it was all about catching these big fish. And I'm like, dude, when you get out into these waters that no one hikes into, and you catch these little itty bitty brook trout, and you catch as many of them in a short amount of time as we do doing it, like there is no better feeling in the world.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got a slight brook trout obsession lately. Could switch back over to bass soon. Could switch back to brown trout. I never know. But right now, that seems to be the thing that's kind of holding my attention the most.
Yeah, this last weekend getting into brook trout was the first time that I can remember catching brook trout since I was a kid. And it was just incredible to get out there. I forgot how pretty those little fish are.
That's the thing is that it's like 4 inches of absolute beauty. And when you get one that's bigger, comparatively speaking, then it's an even bigger deal. But I don't know. I just love the way they look. They're hands down my favorite fish to look at. I tend to care less about the size and the numbers and more about like what they look like. Cool colors, cool patterns, stuff like that. That's what gets me going for the most part. With bass, it's about size because a bass is a bass. They don't really do anything. Smallmouth are pretty cool looking, but trout, just each one is like its own thing, and it's got its own unique pattern or its own unique, kind of print of what it looks like. And that, I don't know, I get all juiced up about that stuff.
I'm right there with you. For me, like I love the way brook trout look, but there's just something about these little native cutthroat trout that we have in Utah. They're just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I don't have much of that going on in my area.
Come on out. We'll put you on some cutties.
For sure.
But yeah, no, it's incredible. You get into these beautiful little fish. I mean, rainbow trout are absolutely stunning when they're native trout instead of being stalkers. When you catch a stalker, I mean, it's a silver thing with a little bit of a red hint to its side. Mm-hmm. But there's just some absolutely beautiful fish out there. And smallmouth bass are very pretty. Largemouth, one day I'll get a double-digit largemouth. One day I'll get a bigger than 2-pound largemouth, but that's a different story. I don't have a lot of largemouth opportunities, but
we have a lot of that.
I've actually got a different coworker. He's in Vermont right now. That's where he grew up, and he keeps sending me pictures of all of these largemouth that he's catching that are absolutely huge. And he's like, dude, you need to come out here one day.
Yeah, I just like to change it up. I'll fish for trout for a little while, and then I'll switch over to bass, and then I'll switch over back, and I'll do, it just keeps it fresh for me. The one thing that's been a constant, though, is that I've kept the fixed line rod in my hand the whole time, which is before I used to change gear, change setups, change everything for each species. Now I'm kind of just trying to tackle them all with the same setup and having a blast doing it.
Absolutely. So we've talked about, some of the, obviously trout, bass. What are some other species that you have either targeted or plan to target?
So one of the main rivers that I fish has a pretty healthy amount of pike and tiger muskie, which I've caught a ton of with spinning gear. Have not caught on the fly, but that is something I really, really, really want to do. I've hooked into a bowfin, got it just about to the net, and then it wriggled off right at the end. That was very frustrating for me, but the fight was a lot of fun, and that was a fun fish to get on the line. And I've hooked into a bunch of carp. One of the places I fish has a ton of carp, but I haven't landed the carp yet. It's been in the kayak where I can't like put the power to turn the fish because I'm moving. You know what I mean? Where that's been the issue with the carp is whenever I've hooked into them, I've been in a kayak or something like that where I haven't been able to like plant and really turn the fish and get it coming my way before it kind of got the better of me. We have a fair amount of, I'll call it a steelhead. Some people probably would call it more of a lake run rainbow trout because I'm in New York. That would be something I'd like to target. I've caught them on conventional gear. I'd like to, if there's spots where I could sling a fixed line system at them, I'd like to give that a shot as well. I'm kind of open to catching anything.
That'd be awesome. There's a guy in Pennsylvania, just so you know, that catches steelhead on Baby Rodzilla. So
on Baby Rodzilla.
Yes, okay. Sir. Have you seen the Wasatch version of the Foxfire that's not fiberglass but the same lengths? It's a sharpshooter, baby blue.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, he catches them on that rod as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's crazy.
I feel like Phoenix Rising would actually be the ideal scenario for that. So yeah, maybe that would be my entryway into that rod if I ever go that way.
There you go. That's another one that's for me. I want to try to get steelhead on the Tenkara rod. Maybe next spring I'll make a trip up to my native grounds of Idaho and try to catch them while they're running. That would be incredible. All right. So what is for you like your picture perfect Tenkara trip?
Probably one of the ones I've actually taken most recently. My wife, my 1-year-old son, and I went to Acadian National Park, and we stayed there for a few days. We explored the park, but each morning I got up before they were awake, and I went and kind of found some random spots within the park and fished for brookies. And the combination of doing that and then going and spending the rest of the day with my family doing stuff in the park, checking out all the sites, and that combo of getting that alone time and that stuff with the fishing, and then having all the family time in the national park with all the stuff that goes with that was pretty sweet. Similarly, like I said, I live near the Adirondacks, and going camping up in that region and kind of hiking around and finding, small fish in small water is fun for me right now.
Absolutely. You gave me the perfect entry point. I was trying to figure out how I was going to loop this in here later. You currently are writing some articles, and your first article that came out last month was about your trip to the national park and that different perspective of being in the national park. Talk to me more about that trip. Like, what's it like getting out there? I mean, obviously national parks, they get very populated, very crazy. You mentioned that a little bit in the article as well. What's it like getting out where there's not a lot of people and just seeing it from a different angle?
Honestly, I felt like I was told a secret that nobody else knew about. You know what I mean? Like I was waking up with the sun, sneaking out of the campsite and picking. You know, I did some research beforehand, obviously, and found where trout might be. Primarily, it was brook trout. And just going into these places, I literally did not see a single other person, and I fished every single day I was there. And to just go to a place, kind of do my research, go find the water, find out that I'm the only one who's there, have full range of the place. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I'm catching fish every day. And then go back to my tent, and my wife and kid are just waking up. That was just a I don't know. I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then the rest of the day, you know, you're going to the different sights and sounds and everything that everybody's doing, and there's 50 people at each place or more, and you know, you can't really get a whole lot of solitude or anything like that. And it was just each day I started out completely by myself in a place I'd never been, catching fish that I found absolutely gorgeous, and nobody else was doing it. And I just loved that. I loved the idea of that, you know.
That's awesome. And, you know, you touched on doing your research and stuff, which leads me to the second article that you wrote on there, of the thing you never knew you needed. And in that article, you talk about like picking that little blue line on the map and just going out there and like seeing what it holds. Talk to me more about doing that. Like, what are you looking for when you're picking where you're going?
So I actually reached out to it's called the DEC in New York, Department of Environmental Conservation. I don't know if it's called that and everywhere, but I reached out to those guys and I said, hey, I'm interested in finding brook trout, and I know that most of these places aren't, you know, listed for everybody to find out about. Can you give me some info? And they were more than willing to talk to me about places that they have found them in the past, and they gave me a bunch of maps and a bunch of different things with little dots showing where they were found and things like that. And he just put the caveat out there. He said, look, some of these streams might not be there when you get there. Some of these streams might not hold fish anymore when you get there, but here's a bunch of options for you to go to explore. And it's pretty much, I've just been working my way through that stuff, you know. It's a lot of just trial and error, and when you do find a spot that's good, it's absolutely awesome, and when you go and find a spot that sucks, it's disheartening, but you just keep rolling.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. I mean, I haven't gotten to that point of reaching out to anyone to find out where they're at, but it's really fun to just look at a map and find a little blue line on there and just be like, man, I wonder. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm doing those trips, I'm plotting an area that's got 2 or 3 different potential spots on them within a close proximity. And that way it's like, okay, I can go here. If there's not fish here, I can bounce over to here pretty quick.
Yeah, I've basically just been, you know, a combination of doing what I said, but then just like picking random like state forests and state land and different shit that I drive by, honestly. Like I'll drive by something and just say, oh, I got to check that out. I mean, I've caught bluegill out of literally a drainage pipe, like, because I just wanted to see if there's fish in there. It wasn't the most fun I ever had, but it was cool to say that I did that, you know? But yeah, like I just try to do a lot of research, beforehand, to at least set myself up to know that there's potential for something to be there. There's a lot of opportunities that aren't listed or named or put on, you know, websites and stuff. And there is something cool about finding those spots on your own. And
Yep.
It's that same feeling like I was talking about before, where it's like, you know, this little secret where there's these little gems and you're getting into them, and either nobody else cares or nobody else knows they're there. I'm not sure which one it is, but I sure care. So I'm going to go after them as much as I can.
No, 100%. So in fishing in New York, I mean, obviously there's different seasons in different states. Sometimes you can fish year round, other times you can't. What does that season look like for you? Is it a year-round thing? Is it only certain months?
So for trout specifically, there's like the April 1st to, I don't even remember the end date. I want to say it's the end of October for people who want to keep the fish. And then you can fish the entire rest of the year as long as you're using artificial bait, flies, or doesn't necessarily have to be fly fishing, but just not live bait, and you're catch and releasing, you can fish the entire year round. And then all the other species have their own specific kind of versions of that. But yeah, I pretty much can fish all year round because I don't keep the fish I catch anyway. So I actually prefer when it starts getting into past that point, and then all those people who are pulling the fish out aren't really there anymore, and that makes it a little better for me.
I agree with that 100%. I'm not a big fish to keep guy. My wife doesn't like fish. I don't mind it, but I can go to the grocery store and buy a fish if I really want it. Or
it's more so just I love catching them, and if everybody keeps taking them out, they're not there to catch anymore. So like it's really, and it's not any more complicated than that.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Get out there, do what you enjoy, and if there's other people that aren't taking out the fish that you enjoy catching, it works out even better.
Yeah, that's actually a relatively new rule for trout. It used to be that just that one shorter season, and they opened the door for the year-round stuff relatively recently. So I've been taking advantage of that, like even hitting some of the streams in the winter and stuff like that, and doing some winter fly fishing has been fun.
That's awesome. And winter fly fishing is something that I feel like is extremely underrated.
Yeah.
There's so much opportunity out there that as long as your water is not freezing solid, there's so many places you can fish, and people just aren't touching it because it's cold outside.
Yeah, I pretty much never see anybody else when I'm there. And I live in a part of the state that gets a pretty significant amount of snow. And so that tends to drive a lot of people away.
Yeah.
A lot of them switch over to fishing the hard water and ice fishing and things like that. But a lot of the trout streams are open and fish are still there, and they still want to eat something. I fish primarily like pretty heavy bead heads and go pretty low to the bottom and real slow drifts, and seems to be the ticket there. But so it's a little bit of a different approach, but they're still there and they still want to eat.
Absolutely. I do dabble in ice fishing a little bit, but there's just something about getting on those streams when you're walking through waist deep snow to get out to the stream.
Yeah, the waiter's got to be back on for those scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no wet waiting.
No.
But I actually did a trip in December this last year where it was exactly that. I walked out to a canyon that I love fishing. I waded through knee to waist deep of snow to get out to the water. Every time you came to a log or something that was across the water, it was break away through the freaking snowdrift on the log so you could keep going upstream. But it's incredible to get out there, and like I said, you just don't run into other people.
No, it's a lot more. There's a quiet to it too that isn't. I don't know why it just feels different when everything's kind of dead and the snow's there and it's just very still. The only thing moving is the water,
Yeah, it's truly incredible, and it's peaceful. It really is. Getting closer to the end of everything here, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like we should?
Not that I can think of. I know that Tenkara is primarily, the unweighted flies, fishing for trout, and I absolutely love that, just like many people do, but I've used it in a lot of situations, in a lot of different bodies of water, in a lot of different ways, and I've caught fish in all those ways. And I said it might not be the most effective method of doing it, but it can be a lot of fun, and it's cool to kind of explore and figure that stuff out. And so I really I like the idea of just doing whatever I want, fishing however I want, and trying as many things as I can with the style of fishing, and just kind of opening different doors that way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Is one thing that we haven't really touched on yet that we could is when you're like using these bigger streamers and things like that, targeting bass, what are techniques that you're using to try to manipulate those flies to where they look as fishy as possible?
So if it's a fly, like if I'm fishing in current, I can swing the fly, or I can just traditionally strip it back, right? But then a lot of it's kind of like changing up the cadence and timing of the twitches, because it's not really stripping. I call it stripping because that's what I'm used to, but it's really just twitching my wrist like this with the fly, bringing it from straight out in front of me to directly next to me in the boat, and then kind of water loading the cast back out in front of me. And it's a lot more about picking where I'm putting the fly. I'm not just casting tons and tons and tons of casts and covering water. I'm really kind of picking like, oh, there's a break in those lily pads right there. I'm going to throw the fly in there, give it one big twitch so the fly really goes like that, and then let it sink back down a little bit before I move it again. Or, oh, there's a log. I'm going to go directly parallel with the log, let it sit there for a minute, and then very slowly twitch it directly along the line of the log, to try to trigger the bite from like a bass sitting under the log. I try to take like the same techniques that I've learned with like even spin fishing or whatever for bass and just kind of apply it. But most of the time, it's really just about where I'm putting the fly. It seems like a lot of the times when I get bites, it's because I put the fly in the right spot and it gets bit pretty immediately when it hits the water, as opposed to my buddy who might be using his bait caster and his chatter bait, just burning it through, and he'll eventually get the hit from all the vibration and chatter and pulling it through. I don't have that luxury with the fly. I kind of I've got to put it in the right spot, and I've got to give it one or two quick motions to get the attention, and then it's kind of over for me, you know.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's cool to hear about. I mean, when we're talking about these smaller streams and stuff, it's pretty much you're just letting the fly come to you for the most part. You can dead drift it. There's a couple different techniques you can do, but it's a lot different than when you're out there on the water and you're having to do these manipulations. And it's those things that a lot of people don't think about when they think about fixed line fishing and how people are doing it. So it's cool to hear the different ways you're manipulating the fly. Obviously with poppers, we're going to do kind of the same thing, and we're going to jig the rod back up towards us, making that popper give you that popping effect on the water.
Yep. And that's pretty much what I'll do, because it just depends on what type of fly I'm throwing, but the general idea is the same. It's a lot of wrist. It's a lot of doing stuff with my wrist and kind of slowly moving my arm in whatever direction I want. The one thing I'll say, I don't know if you did a lot of Western fly fishing, but you know how they always say to do for warm water species like bass and stuff. But you know how they say to do like the strip set instead of the trout set. Mm-hmm. From sitting in a kayak, because I do a lot of sitting while I fish too. To do that strip set with my Western rod would be really hard. With the Tenkara rod, I don't have to do that per se. I can really just kind of set the hook like I would normally, and that actually led to like a lot more hookups for me. There's no line all over the place at my feet, on the side of the boat, into the water, all that excess line, and the hook set is actually easier for me that way. So it's kind of a give and take, you know.
Yeah, so I actually, when I did Western fly fishing, I would do kind of a combination of the strip set and the trout set. And so when I was stripping like woolly buggers and streamers and things like that, instead of stripping it straight down the rod like you see a lot of people do, I would hold the rod out to the side, and that way I was able to, as I'm stripping it back and I'm doing that strip set, I'm able to kind of pull back on the rod and get a combination of the two. So I was able to get quite a bit of hookups because of that combination. But I didn't target a lot of bass. It was mostly trout.
Yeah, the bass fly that I've been enjoying the most lately is called a swinging D. I don't know if you have heard of it.
I have not.
Yeah, it's like it almost, you know, those like foam earplugs.
Mm-hmm.
It almost looks like one of those, but it's a lot more stiff as the head. So it's got that kind of cone head looking thing with foam, but then it turns into like an articulated fly. It's got a joint in it. It's got a bunch of beads down the center and then tons of feathers and flies. And that thing, you know, it'll come up because it's got the foam, and when you twitch it, it dives down under the water. All that articulatedness of the fly makes it, you know, go crazy, and then it kind of floats back up towards the top. So it gives you almost like one of those kind of motions. So I kind of have relied on using the design of the fly to give me some more action when I, you know, don't have as many options with what I can actually do with my hands or my arms or whatever.
Sounds like you need to use that fly for muskie too. I bet you that would.
That is why I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a very pike and muskie related fly to me. Like,
yeah, and it's really nice to cast too, which is cool because some of those things are, some of the pike and muskie flies are massive.
Yeah, they're heavy suckers. I mean, I've got tiger muskie around me. There's actually a northern pike spot as well, but I haven't targeted them yet, and I'm still trying to get either of them on a Tenkara rod. But some of those pike flies that you see people throw, I mean, even the small ones, because they're using the big heavy hooks, they're just such heavy flies. Even using bigger rods, it's just like, man, it sucks casting that sucker out there.
Yeah, that's why that's been the biggest experimentation, is finding like the biggest flies that are the most comfortable to cast that also look good in the water with a Tenkara rod, because you do have to find what's the best option for that. You know, I'm not gonna back cast and haul line and double haul and throw. You know, it's like, so I really have to find something that's comfortable to give one or two little back casts and I'm in the water. I don't have the luxury of all the weight of the fly line.
Absolutely. I'm actually this fall going out to a spot where I caught my first and only tiger muskie. And as it starts to cool down and those muskies start working their way back up towards the surface a little bit, I'm going to start throwing some mice around sunset on my T-Hunter or Phoenix Rising and see if we can't get a hook up.
I was fishing a creek recently, and it's a creek where the muskie migrate up it, even though generally they're not there. And I had a muskie come right up to my feet. It literally followed the fly. I was standing in the water, and it came right to my feet.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, it came right up to me, stared me down, said nah, and then just took off. It was terrifying.
That video, I'm like, man, that is crazy.
Yeah, I've never seen a muskie come that like aggressively towards me while I'm actually in the water.
That's insane. My only muskie that I've caught left me with a memento. I've got a scar on my thumb and in the between my thumb and an index finger there. Got a little bit too close to
those toothy critters. Don't mess around.
Yeah. For anyone that has not seen the mouth of a tiger muskie, I've got a post. You'll have to go a couple years back on my Facebook page, but there is a post with a tiger muskie, and I do have a close-up of its mouth. And that picture was before its mouth was full of blood from my hand. But
I've caught a pretty big pickerel on a western rod, but I've not got the pike or the muskie on the fly yet. So it's the closest thing I've got with that kind of toothy, you know, it's, aside from the pattern, they seem the same to me.
Yeah, no, those two are, I mean, they're related, right? So
yes.
They're the same fish. And I mean, you can get pike that look very much like the same pattern of a muskie. It just depends.
The tiger muskie are just unreal because they've got that like iridescence and the vertical stripes. They're very, very cool fish.
They are. They're absolutely stunning, and we'll have to have a race to see who gets one first.
Yeah, well, it's getting to that time, so probably we'll be hopefully able to get one on the line soon.
Yeah, that'll be incredible to see, man. I really look forward to hearing about it if you do get one. So send pictures, videos.
Yeah, for sure.
I hear it. We actually the next episode we're going to be sitting down with Aaron Kerr again. We spoke with him back in the Tenkara or the Tennessee episode, and we're going to be going over his Alaska trip, and he's actually going to Florida next week. So we're going to hit on both of those trips in our next episode. It's going to be exciting.
I was following along jealously to his Instagram page while he was doing that. That looked very, very cool.
Yeah, I was actually I was with Ruben. I spent a lot of time with Ruben, like not a lot of time, but I spent a lot of time with Ruben. And my wife gets annoyed because I generally leave with new rods when maybe there's a connection here.
Yeah.
But I was with Ruben within like 20 minutes of when Aaron posted the first picture of him with the pink salmon on the Tenkara rod. And again, I showed that picture to Ruben, and he just lit up. It's awesome to see.
Ruben's a nice dude. I know when I first was looking into figuring out what rod I could use to target the bass, he talked to me a ton about exactly what I was going to do and exactly what kind of water I was fishing and how I was going to do it. And then there was I can't remember why, but there was some kind of mix up with the shipping or something, and he called me and we had like an hour-long conversation, and we talked for a while, and then he sent me a bunch of free stuff with it, and he's just a nice dude. It made me very happy to have the products that he's making. It was all of a sudden I'm like, the owner's calling me to talk about okay, this is cool, let's talk, and it was just very nice, all the stuff that he did to go and make sure I was getting the right rod.
No, it's incredible. I had a very similar first experience with Ruben when I picked up my T-Hunter as well, and I talked about it a little bit in my last episode, but I reached out to a bunch of different companies. I fished a few different rods. I went to some expos and felt and held different rods, trying to decide what I wanted. And I had reached out to Ruben before the expo that I went to look at rods, and was like, "Hey, are you guys going to be there?" It's like, "No, we won't be there, but after you go and look at rods, reach out to me again, and we'll schedule a time to go fishing so you can see the rods in action." And so I was able to fish all the different rods and decide what I wanted. And it was that connection that really was one of the deciding factors with me, and the fact that I'm in Utah and they're in Utah, and it's convenient. But they're just, him and Nathan both, they're incredible guys. I've met with Brent. I've talked with Tenkara Tanuki, and that just really the entire Tenkara community you get with all these different guys, and they're all incredible and they're fun to deal with. I haven't had a chance to deal with Tenkara Rod Company yet, or Tenkara USA, but I've heard phenomenal things about Tenkara Rod Company. Again, you'll have to let me know how the Yari fishes, because that's one that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everyone I've met in the Tenkara community has been more than willing to talk to me, talk shop, talk about different rods, talk about, whatever, and send me flies, everyone's been so cool. It's a welcoming community that I have not found it elsewhere so far. I don't know if I've just run into the right people or not, but it just seems like everybody's very cool and very interested in sharing what Tenkara has to offer, and just wants it to grow and wants it to be, shared with more and more people. And everybody I've met has just been awesome. Most of which has been online, but that's cool. I don't think I've ever seen another person fishing Tenkara while I've been out, but I sure have found a lot of cool people online that are always willing to talk, always willing to share and give advice, and it's just been really sweet.
Yeah, no, it's a really tight-knit community. It's really cool to see others grow and to interact with others online. I mean, you look at Facebook, for example, there's just so many Tenkara-related Facebook pages out there. You look at Instagram, and I mean, my entire recommended thing is just Tenkara fishing people. And it's incredible to connect with different people and, learn from other people, check out the resources that are out there. And I mean, it's insane, really.
Yeah, it's just, I just haven't found it elsewhere. Like I said, I just really haven't. It's a different thing, and I like it a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to sit down with me today.
Absolutely.
Steve, where can people follow you in your Tenkara journey?
Steve Mahle Fishing on Instagram, Steve_Mahle_fishing. And then there is a link to the kind of blog that I started, like we talked about a little bit. I've only got a couple articles. It's just something that I started doing, but I'm really interested in it. Not really talking about how-tos or different things like that, just more of my thoughts or feelings about different things that I've experienced while I'm out there. So those two places are best. I don't have Facebook or anything like that. So Steve Mahle Fishing on Instagram, and then there's a link to my Substack on my Instagram profile.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much again for coming on with us, Steve, and talking about fishing in New York, talking about your blog and some of your different experiences. It's been a pleasure to sit down and talk with you. For everyone else out there, thank you for tuning into this episode of Let's Talk Tenkara. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or suggestions for the episode. You can reach me on Instagram at Let's Talk Tenkara, or you can find me on Facebook at Brenden Harden. You can reach out to me on my first personal Instagram page. That's Brenden.Harden_Tenkara. Really just reach out to me however you want. Gmail works. Let's talk Tenkara at gmail.com. We're still looking for people to fill in 50 States of Tenkara episodes. Steve hit New York for us today. It's great to talk to more people. I've got a lead on someone in Hawaii, so that episode could be coming soon. I'm really excited about that one. But yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions or suggestions. And thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks, man.
This has been the Let's Talk Tenkara podcasts, hosted by Brenden Harden. You can reach us on Instagram at Let's Talk Tenkara. You can also shoot us an email at letstalktenkara@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out with any suggestions for future episodes, or if you or someone you know would like to be featured on the show, or you think they'd be a good fit, shoot us a message and we'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you for tuning in, and tune in next time and Let's Talk Tenkara, a Salt Lake Tenkara production.